Welcome to Folktales by SB. Please subscribe to my channel. And now, let's begin the story. In the heart of Lagos, where the pulse of ambition beat to the rhythm of 1,000 honking cars, and the gleaming towers of success touched the clouds, lived Nkechi. A woman whose smile could rival the morning sun peeking over the Atlantic. Nkechi had journeyed from the vibrant streets of Port Harcourt, carrying dreams as bright and bold as her traditional Ankara prince. She had found her happily ever after in Chidi, a man she met under the hallowed ceilings of their bustling megachurch, his voice a steady bass in the choir, his eyes reflecting a quiet devotion that promised a lifetime of shared hymns and unwavering faith. 5 years into their marriage, from the outside, their life was a picture of modern African success. A tastefully furnished apartment in Lekki, careers on the rise, and Sundays spent in fellowship. Chidi often holding Nkechi's hand, a silent testament to their bond. Yet, behind the polished veneer of their perfect life, in the quiet solitude of their bedroom after the city lights dimmed, a cold, creeping shadow had begun to stretch across Nkechi's heart. A silence louder than the Lagos traffic. A secret, more suffocating than the humid air. Nkechi, a woman who had always prided herself on her intuition, found herself battling a gnawing unease that began subtly, like a whisper on the Harmattan wind, and grew into a roar inside her soul. She remembered the early days of their marriage, filled with laughter, whispered dreams, and an intimacy that spoke volumes without words. Chidi, her rock, her confidant, had been everything she had prayed for. But now, as the clock edged past 2 in the morning, a familiar glow emanated from beneath his side of the duvet, casting an eerie blue light on the ceiling. His back was always turned to her, his focus riveted to the small screen in his hands, his breathing shallow and quick. She'd pretend to be asleep, her heart aching with each passing minute, the distance between them widening with the digital chasm he created every night. It wasn't just the lack of physical intimacy that troubled her, though that alone was like a drought in a fertile land. It was the emotional withdrawal, the sudden blankness in his eyes when she tried to engage him after these nocturnal rituals, the subtle evasion that felt like a betrayal before a single word was uttered. She feared confronting him, like touching a wound that refused to heal, knowing the potential explosion could shatter the fragile peace she desperately clung to in their home. In a society where a woman's worth was often tied to the harmony of her marriage, Nkechi felt herself treading on eggshells, a prisoner of unspoken questions and growing dread, knowing that a river without banks eventually floods the village, and unspoken secrets often drown a home. The scent of Lagos at dusk, a heady mix of grilled plantains, exhaust fumes, and damp earth after a sudden shower, usually brought a smile to Nkechi's face. It was the smell of home, of possibility, of a life she'd built with Chidi, brick by careful brick. Tonight, however, as she stepped onto their Lekki apartment balcony, the familiar aroma felt heavy, pressing down on her chest. Inside, Chidi was already on his phone, the familiar blue light, a beacon of his distant world. It had been like this for almost a year now. What started as occasional late-night scrolling had morphed into a ritual, a wall between them thicker than any concrete. Their conversations had grown stunted, their laughter hollow, and the vibrant intimacy that once defined their union had withered to a dry, barren patch. Every evening, after their shared meal, Chidi would retreat into himself, his fingers dancing. Across the screen, a secret language Nkechi couldn't decipher, a mystery that was slowly eroding the foundation of their love. Nkechi remembered their wedding day, the joy, the promises exchanged before God, and an assembly of beaming families. Chidi, handsome in his tailored suit, had looked at her with such adoration, a devotion that promised forever. "You are my jewel, my light," he'd whispered, and she had believed him with every fiber of her being. Now she felt like a forgotten ornament, gathering dust in a corner. The once lively discussions about their future, about children, about shared dreams, had been replaced by the quiet hum of his phone and the deafening silence of her unanswered questions. She tried to engage him, to spark a conversation, to bring back the man she married. She'd wear his favorite nightdress, prepare a special meal, even suggest a weekend getaway. But his responses were always the same: a distracted nod, a vague promise, a quick kiss on her forehead that felt more like a dismissal than an embrace. The man she loved was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away, lost in the labyrinth of his digital world. Nkechi felt the societal pressure keenly. As a good Christian wife, she was expected to maintain peace, to be patient, to endure. But endurance had its limits, and her spirit, once so resilient, was beginning to fray at the edges. The metallic clang of the neighbor's gate closing reverberated through the quiet compound, a stark punctuation mark in the Lagos night. For Nkechi, wrapped in the cool embrace of her silk wrapper, it was a reminder of the hours that had slipped away, leaving her once again alone with her thoughts. Chidi was asleep now, his phone finally abandoned on the bedside table, its screen dark, its secrets momentarily dormant. But the damage was done. The hours he spent glued to that device had carved an invisible yet palpable canyon between them. She'd tried talking to him, her voice soft, pleading, asking him what troubles, him what kept him so engrossed. "Just work, darling," he'd murmur, eyes still distant, "catching up on some mails." But Nkechi knew. Her heart, a drum of rising suspicion, beat a different rhythm. There was a furtiveness in his movements, a sudden jolt if she approached too closely, a quick swipe of the screen that spoke volumes. The work excuse had worn thin, transparent as the morning mist. Her grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as deep as the river Niger, used to say, "A lizard that falls from the iroko tree says it will praise itself if no one else does." Nkechi had always taken pride in her marriage, in Chidi, in their shared faith. Now, that pride was eroding, replaced by a bitter seed of doubt. The silence from Chidi wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of evasion. Her attempts to reconnect, to rekindle the spark, were met with subtle rebuffs that felt like tiny cuts, bleeding her spirit dry. She remembered a particularly painful evening when she had reached for his hand, desperate for a tangible connection, and he had flinched, pulling away, his gaze fixed on the screen. The sting of that rejection had lingered, a bitter aftertaste, in her mouth. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself that all marriages had their phases, their quiet storms, but this felt different. This felt like a deliberate withdrawal, a conscious choice to shut her out. The glowing screen wasn't just a device. It was an altar to a devotion she couldn't understand, a rival that consumed her husband's attention, his time, and, ultimately, their shared life. The air in the bedroom grew thick with unspoken tension, heavy and suffocating like a Lagos Harmattan haze. Nkechi lay restless, staring at the ceiling, listening to Chidi's soft snores from his side of the bed. It was 3 a.m., and for once, his phone was not glowing. He had finally fallen asleep, exhausted perhaps from whatever digital journey he had embarked on. But the quiet brought no peace. Instead, it amplified the insistent whisper of her intuition, urging her to act. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and necessity. She knew what she had to do, even though every fiber of her being recoiled at the thought. To invade his privacy, to cross that line, felt like a betrayal of the trust she had religiously upheld for 5 years. But what if the greater betrayal was already happening, hidden behind the digital veil? What if her silence, her fear, was enabling a secret that was slowly devouring their marriage? Her hand trembled as she cautiously reached across the bed, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of his phone. A surge of guilt washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This felt wrong, like stealing a piece of his soul. But then, the image of his distant eyes, the coldness in his touch, the hollow echo of his work email's excuse, flashed across her mind. A child who doesn't listen to his mother's advice will often fall into trouble twice, her mother often warned. Nkechi felt like that child, stubbornly walking towards a precipice she couldn't see, unable to trust her own judgment anymore. She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the phone, a small, innocent object that suddenly held the power to shatter her entire world. The screen was locked, but Chidi, in his hurried slumber, had left his fingerprint on the sensor. With Arthur, a prayer to her ancestors for strength, and a desperate plea to whatever higher power watched over her, Nkechi took the plunge, pressing his thumb against the sensor. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the darkness of her fear, revealing a labyrinth of apps, each a potential doorway to the truth she both craved and dreaded. She navigated with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning, searching, bracing herself for whatever ugly truth lay hidden beneath the surface of their perfect life. The browser history glowed back at her, a stark, undeniable testament to the secret life Chidi had meticulously hidden. Nkechi's breath hitched in her throat, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The words on the screen, raw and explicit, were like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Page after page, image after image, videos of women, of acts, of a world so far removed from the sanctity of their Christian marriage, from the image of the man she thought she knew. Her mind reeled, trying to process the grotesque reality. Disbelief morphed into a searing anger, then a profound, soul-crushing heartbreak. This wasn't just a casual glance. This was a deep, pervasive immersion, a ritualistic descent into a darkness she couldn't comprehend. The sheer volume, the frequency, spoke of an obsession, a voracious hunger that had devoured her husband's nights, his attention, everything that should have been hers. Tears, hot and bitter, streamed down her face, blurring the damning evidence. A choked sob escaped her lips, quickly stifled lest it awaken him. How could this be? Chidi, the man who led prayers at home, who preached abstinence before marriage, who quoted scriptures with such conviction. It was a cruel, elaborate deception, a carefully constructed facade built on lies. She remembered their courtship, the gentle touches, the respectful distance, his insistence on waiting until marriage for intimacy, all couched in his unwavering faith. She had seen him as a beacon of purity in a world of moral ambiguity, a rare gem. Now, the gem felt like a shard of broken glass, cutting her deeply. Shame, raw and blistering, washed over her. Not for him, but for herself. For not seeing. For being so utterly, devastatingly naive. In their culture, such a revelation was not just a personal failing. It was a family disgrace, a wound that would fester, gossiped about in hushed tones behind closed doors. Her world, once so solid, so predictable, had crumbled into a heap of digital dust, leaving her stranded in a wasteland of betrayal. The image of Chidi, her good Christian man, was irrevocably shattered, replaced by a stranger consumed by a secret vice. The morning light, usually a comforting embrace, felt harsh and unforgiving as it streamed through their bedroom window. Nkechi had barely slept, her eyes red and puffy, her heart a raw wound. Chidi stirred, eventually opening his eyes, a faint smile gracing his lips as he reached for her. But Nkechi recoiled, the touch feeling like an electric shock. "Chidi," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." The change in her tone, the haunted look in her eyes, must have pierced through his morning haze. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. She tossed his phone onto the bed between them, open to the browser history, the damning evidence still glaring from the screen. For a moment, he stared at it, his face draining of color, a mix of shock and dawning horror. Then, the anger ignited. "How dare you, Nkechi?" he roared, his voice cracking. "You went through my phone? My personal property? What kind of wife does that?" His accusation, dripping with indignation, felt like a deliberate attempt to deflect, to turn the blame back on her. "Personal property?" she retorted, her own anger finally breaking through the dam of her pain. "Our marriage is personal, Chidi. Our intimacy, our trust. What about that? Is it also personal property you choose to desecrate every night?" The argument escalated, their voices rising, shattering the fragile peace of their home. He denied the severity, downplayed it as just curiosity. Stress relief. He even tried to blame her, suggesting her lack of enthusiasm in the bedroom pushed him away. "It's nothing. Just videos. It means nothing," he shouted, his face contorted. But Nkechi knew. She knew the glazed look in his eyes, the emotional distance, the profound emptiness in their marriage, all stemming from this. His gaslighting, reminiscent of what her grandmother called sweeping dust under the mat, only fueled her rage. This wasn't just about videos. This was about a profound betrayal, a secret life he had chosen over her, over their vows, over their shared faith. The man she loved was a stranger, wrapped in a deceitful cloak of denial, determined to protect his secret, even at the cost of their world. In the sanctity of her mother's living room in Surulere, amidst the scent of freshly brewed hibiscus tea and the comforting presence of familiar ancestral photographs, Nkechi finally broke down. Her mother, Mama Nneka, a woman whose strength was forged in the fires of life and whose wisdom was etched onto every line of her gentle face, listened with grave intensity as Nkechi recounted the agonizing discovery. Mama Nneka's initial reaction was a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening with a mixture of shock and profound sadness. "Iwo, my daughter," she whispered, her hand instinctively going to Nkechi's head, a maternal gesture of comfort and distress. The shame, raw and palpable, hung in the air between them. In their Igbo culture, a daughter's marital strife, especially one involving such a taboo subject, was a heavy burden, a stain on the family's honor. "A secret sickness kills the patient in silence," Mama Nneka mused, her gaze distant, fixed, on a faded photograph of her own parents. She spoke of the importance of endurance, of managing one's home, of fighting for the sanctity of marriage. "But not at the cost of your spirit, Nkechi. A woman is not a doormat." She advised Nkechi to seek guidance, not just from family, but from a spiritual leader. The whispers of "manage him" would undoubtedly come from other relatives, from old aunties who believed a woman's patience was boundless, that troubles should be borne in silence. But Mama Nneka, discerning and loving, knew this wound ran deeper than mere marital squabbles. She understood the profound betrayal, the spiritual and emotional desecration Nkechi felt. The thought of Chidi's mother, Nkechi's mother-in-law, learning of this sent a fresh wave of panic through Nkechi. The implications were horrifying. Accusations of Nkechi being an inadequate wife, of not satisfying her husband, of bringing shame to their son. The weight of potential judgment from two families, the immense pressure to conform to traditional expectations of a good wife, threatened to crush her. But Mama Nneka's embrace, firm and loving, reminded Nkechi that she was not alone, that some battles, even within the confines of marriage, required communal wisdom and divine intervention. With her mother's unwavering support bolstering her fragile spirit, Nkechi found the courage to take the next, incredibly difficult step. "We need to see Pastor Ekayet," she stated to Chidi, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Chidi, still reeling from the aftermath of their explosive confrontation, and the silent, disapproving gaze of Mama Nneka during her visit, initially resisted, muttering about private matters and airing our dirty laundry. His defiance was slowly wilting under the combined pressure of Nkechi's resolute stance and the unspoken threat of further family involvement. He knew that in their community, ignoring a wife's plea for pastoral intervention was a grave offense, hinting at guilt. Eventually, with a reluctant sigh that spoke volumes of his pride wounded, he conceded. "Fine," he mumbled, "but it won't change anything." Pastor Ekayet was not just a spiritual leader. She was a woman renowned for her piercing insight, her unwavering faith, and her ability to mend broken souls within the sprawling congregation. Her office, adorned with vibrant African art and scriptures, exuded an aura of calm strength. As Nkechi, her voice trembling, finally laid bare the painful truth to the pastor, Chidi sat beside her, rigid, his gaze fixed on the floor, occasionally interjecting with defensive justifications. Pastor Ekayet listened patiently, her eyes, deep and knowing, absorbing every word, every nuance of Nkechi's pain and Chidi's discomfort. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, but merely nodded, her expression growing increasingly solemn. When Nkechi finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. "My children," Pastor Ekayet finally said, her voice a balm, "the evil that hides in the dark will always be exposed by the light. No marriage can thrive on secrets, for a hidden wound festers and poisons the whole body." She scheduled their first formal counseling session, a beacon of hope, however faint, shimmering through the gloom of Nkechi's despair. For the first time in months, Nkechi felt a tiny flicker of possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, their shattered world could be painstakingly pieced back together. The counseling sessions began, each one a painstaking excavation of the hidden resentments and unspoken pains that had calcified between Nkechi and Chidi. Pastor Ekayeta, with her gentle yet firm demeanor, created a safe space where honesty was not just encouraged, but demanded. She began by addressing Chidi's denial, confronting his attempts to minimize the gravity of his actions. "My son," she said, her voice soft but insistent, "a small fire can still burn down a forest. This is not just videos. This is a betrayal of vows, a theft of intimacy, and a wound inflicted upon your wife's spirit." Chidi, initially defensive, his arms crossed tightly across his chest, slowly but surely began to soften under her relentless, loving scrutiny. He offered weak explanations, blaming stress from work, even vaguely referencing a need for escape. But Pastor Ekayet wasn't satisfied. She pushed deeper, her questions like skilled surgical instruments probing beyond the surface. An unexamined life is not worth living, Pastor Ekayet quoted, her eyes fixed on Chidi. She spoke of the spiritual implications, the way addiction, in any form, created a spiritual drought, blocking the flow of grace and genuine connection. She explained that addiction wasn't merely a moral failing, it was a complex struggle that often had deep psychological roots. She highlighted how Chidi's constant engagement with explicit material had rewired his brain, creating unrealistic expectations for intimacy and severely diminishing his capacity for true connection with Nkechi. Nkechi listened, a mix of anger and a fragile understanding warring within her. The pastor's words gave context to the emotional chasm, the lack of desire, the very real sense of being replaced by digital illusions. Pastor Ekayeta emphasized that true healing required brutal honesty from Chidi, not just about his actions, but about why these actions had taken root so deeply within him. She gently pressed him. "This started long before your marriage, didn't it, Chidi? This seed was planted much earlier. Tell us, when did this journey begin?" The question hung in the air, weighted with years of unspoken truth, urging Chidi to finally confront the genesis of his secret torment. The question hung in the air, a silent command, forcing Chidi to confront the ghosts of his past. He squirmed, his gaze darting between Nkechi's tear-filled eyes and Pastor Ekayeta's unwavering stare. Then a shudder ran through him, and his carefully constructed dam of denial finally crumbled. "It started when I was 12, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper, thick with shame and a newfound vulnerability. The words landed like heavy stones, echoing in the quiet office. 12. Nkechi gasped, the raw pain in her chest momentarily overshadowed by a wave of profound sorrow. For the young boy Chidi once was, he recounted a childhood marked by absence. His parents, both ambitious professionals, were often away, consumed by their careers and the relentless pursuit of upward mobility in a competitive Lagos. He was left in the care of house helps, with unrestricted access to the family computer and, crucially, an unsupervised internet connection. "They bought me everything," he explained, tears finally tracking paths down his cheeks. "The best gadgets, toys. But they weren't really there. I felt lonely. So incredibly lonely." The internet, initially a playground, soon became a refuge, a secret world where he could escape the crushing solitude. The explicit content, stumbled upon accidentally, offered a perverse sense of excitement, an illicit thrill that filled a void no toy or house help could. Pastor Ekayet nodded solemnly. "The river carves its path from a small stream, my son," she said, her voice imbued with a deep sadness. She explained how early, unsupervised exposure to such material, especially during formative years, bypassed healthy emotional and sexual development. It created distorted views of intimacy, replacing genuine connection with objectification, conditioning the brain to seek immediate, artificial gratification, thus destroying the capacity for authentic adult intimacy. Nkechi listened, her anger warring with a new, complex understanding. The betrayal still cut deeply, but now she saw the roots, tangled and tragic, leading back to a lonely boy seeking solace in the shadows of the digital world. The revelation was devastating, yet it offered a painful clarity, illuminating the dark origins of their marital agony. The weight of the revelation was too great for Nkechi and Chidi to bear alone. Pastor Ekayet, understanding the deep cultural significance of family and healing, advised them to bring their extended families together. In our culture, she stated, a broken calabash is not just one person's shame, but a collective burden, and healing, too, must be a communal effort. The prospect filled Nkechi with dread. To expose such a flaw, such a secret, to the judging eyes of their kin felt like a public stripping. But Mama Neka, her mother, was resolute. The sun will always find its way through the cracks, my daughter. Better it shines on the truth now than that you live in eternal darkness. The family meeting was convened in Pastor Ekayeta's larger office, typically reserved for church committee gatherings. Chidi's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, sleek and successful, arrived first, their faces stiff with barely concealed annoyance at being summoned for what they assumed was a minor marital dispute. Nkechi's family, her parents, and her wise auntie, Ifeyinwa, came next, their expressions a mix of concern and guarded expectation. The tension in the room was palpable, thick like the humid air before a thunderstorm. After a prayer to invoke wisdom and calm, Pastor Ekayet, with Nkechi's consent, gently but firmly recounted the painful truth, culminating in Chidi's confession about his childhood exposure. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Chidi's mother gasped, clutching her chest, her face contorted in disbelief and shame. His father, a man usually composed and authoritative, turned a shade of sickly gray, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and regret. Whispers erupted from Nkechi's side of the family, a mix of anger for their daughter and profound sadness for the couple. Mr. Okoro finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. 12? My son? How could we not have known? The pastor, with quiet authority, stepped in, reminding them that this was not a time for blame, but for understanding, for healing. She emphasized that the shame was not just Chidi's, but a reflection of a societal blind spot, a collective failure to protect the innocence of children in the digital age. This was not merely a marriage in crisis, it was a deeply rooted familial trauma, now unveiled for all to see. The raw emotions, once unleashed, took time to settle. Chidi's parents, initially defensive and then consumed by guilt, struggled to reconcile the image of their successful, well-adjusted son with the broken man confessing years of silent torment. Mr. Okoro, usually so stoic, confessed his regret, his voice thick with unshed tears. "We gave him everything," he murmured. "We thought opportunity was enough. We failed to give him our presence." Mrs. Okoro, a woman who prided herself on her children's achievements, was visibly shattered by the revelation, mourning the lost innocence and the profound impact of their ambition on their son's early life. Nkechi's parents, while deeply hurt for their daughter, found a path from anger to empathy, understanding the tragic roots of Chidi's addiction. Auntie Ifeyinwa, her voice a soothing balm, reminded them all, "A tree doesn't fall by itself. Aditi diyod, a strong wind must have blown it. Let us not just mourn the fall, but tend to the roots." Pastor Ekayeta then shifted the focus from revelation to resolution. She spoke of communal responsibility, reminding them that the family unit, the umuna, was a bedrock of healing in African society. "This burden is not Chidi's alone," she pronounced, "nor Nkechi's. It is a family wound, and it requires a family's love to heal." She outlined a path forward for Chidi: intensive therapy, focusing on addiction recovery and trauma, spiritual counseling, and a commitment to radical transparency within his marriage. For Nkechi, she spoke of the difficult journey of forgiveness, not as forgetting, but as an act of liberation from bitterness, an empowerment to define her future. Forgiveness is a road, not a destination, the pastor advised, and you, Nkechi, must decide if you are willing to walk a difficult road with him. The decision, she stressed, was ultimately hers, free from societal pressure or family dictates. Chidi, humbled and broken, looked at Nkechi, his eyes pleading, not for instant forgiveness, but for a chance to rebuild, to atone for the years of deceit. The silence in the room was pregnant with expectation, as Nkechi grappled with the enormity of her choice, the future of her marriage, her very happiness, hanging in the balance. The decision weighed heavily on Nkechi, a burden as profound as the harmattan dust settling on the city. She spent days in introspection, praying, consulting with her mother, and wrestling with her own battered heart. The betrayal was deep, the pain immense, but also a new understanding had begun to bloom, a fragile seed nurtured by Pastor Ekayeta's wisdom and the remorse she saw in Chidi's eyes. She remembered her grandmother's saying, "The sun does not forget the earth after setting." Nkechi decided she would not forget the man she married, the good in him, the Christian values that still flickered beneath the layers of his addiction. She would choose to stay. But it would not be a return to the old ways. It would be a new path, forged in honesty and unwavering commitment. Nkechi returned to Pastor Ekayeta's office, Chidi by her side, his posture still, but his eyes holding a fragile hope. "I will stay," she announced, her voice clearer, stronger than it had been in months. "But this is not forgiveness for yesterday's pain, Chidi. This is a promise for tomorrow's hard work." She laid out her conditions: consistent therapy, full transparency, no more secrets, and shared counseling for them both. Chidi, tears of gratitude welling in his eyes, readily agreed, his resolve bolstered by the sheer grace of her decision. The families, informed of Nkechi's choice, rallied around them. Chidi's parents, humbled, committed to supporting his therapy financially and emotionally, acknowledging their role in his early trauma. Nkechi's family pledged their continued love and support, understanding that true communal harmony meant embracing the difficult journey of healing. Their marriage was not magically mended. The scars would remain, a testament to the battles fought. But it was no longer a marriage built on digital shadows and unspoken lies. It was a partnership embarking on a new dawn, a difficult, arduous path towards authentic connection, built on shared vulnerability, perseverance, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The journey ahead was long, but Nkechi knew, as the sun always rises after the darkest night, that with honesty, wisdom, and the unwavering support of their community, their story could still bloom into a testament of enduring love, proving that even the strongest storms can lead to a deeper, more resilient foundation. If you enjoyed the story, then like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from.